Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 8, which is about behavioral ecology and reproduction. I'd like to begin today by introducing these two terms to you, proximate and ultimate, and how they relate to behavioral ecology. A proximate or an immediate cause addresses how a behavior actually occurs, whereas an ultimate cause addresses the question of why a behavior occurs evolutionarily. So, an ultimate cause involves an understanding of the reason or an explanation of the behavior. And this is what most behavioral ecologists focus on. One example of an ultimate explanation is the optimal foraging theory that really dives into why animals forage the way that they do. And the optimal foraging theory states that animals will maximize the amount of energy gained per unit of feeding time and minimize the risks involved. So, what it does is it explains that there's a balance between the energy obtained from a resource and the risk of and time involved obtaining that resource. So evolutionarily, this maximizes energy gain for the organism. So according to optimal foraging theory, the profitability of a food item to a foraging animal depends on the net amount of energy it gets from the food relative to the amount of time that it spends obtaining and processing the food. Processing can mean different things. We'll look at an example in a minute of what processing means for oyster catchers. But profitability is equal to energy divided by time, where again the P is equal to profitability, E is equal to the net energy, and T is equal to the time spent on that obtaining and processing that food resource. So here's our oyster catcher. An example of this involves oyster catchers who feed on bivalves, and these bivalves must be opened in order to be eaten. So the birds must first actually locate a bivalve. They then must lift it out of the sand, and then they have to open it. And this is all before they can eat what's inside and obtain the energy. So the small shells you can imagine are easy to open, but they don't provide enough energy to really make all that other stuff worth the cost. And the largest shells provide the most energy, but they're very strong and they're also very heavy. So it can be hard to process them, to lift them out of the sand, and to actually open them to get what's inside. So we tend to see that oyster catchers choose intermediate to large size shells instead of the largest ones in order to maximize their profitability. So you can kind of think of this as Goldilocks and finding just the right size to maximize profitability. Another way to maximize food obtained for the energy put into getting that food is to live in a group of some kind. And groups can do all kinds of things. They can coordinate to search for food. They can hunt together for prey for that individuals just wouldn't be able to do by themselves. Groups can also be a place to find a potential mate. It's, for example, these prairie chickens that you see down here in the picture. The males are showing off their tail feathers for a group of ladies. This is called a lek. A lek is a gathering where males gather to show off for attracting potential female mates. And groups may also just provide protection. Simply by being a large group, the number of individuals is going to reduce any given individual's chance of being captured by a predator. We call this the dilution effect. So the larger the crowd is, the less chance there is that you individually are going to get chosen or captured by a predator. Also, the number of individuals looking in a group, looking around for potential predators, means that in large groups, each individual has to look up for predators less frequently than if they were in a smaller group or by themselves. Think of how often an individual or a very small group of birds that were foraging in grass, think of how often they would have to look up to see if a predator was coming in order to protect themselves. However, if you have a really large group, you can see in these figures down here shown to you that the total number of head raises in a large flock can be much more, meaning that the group is much more diligent in looking for predators, but the number of head raises per individual go down as in a large flock size. So that's another way to save energy. So there's not only benefits to group living, there are a number of costs to living in groups as well. Large groups are more likely to be located by predators, just generally because they're more conspicuous. A large group is easier to find than an individual that can hide easier. Large groups also, as a negative, tend to spread infection. Just like we know, as we've been directed to do social distancing during the COVID virus outbreak. Large groups in high densities can spread disease, can spread parasites. So that's another consideration in group living that sometimes acts on that. Sometimes, and even though the groups may be better at locating and capturing food, I wanted to mention that food has to be split up and shared by all the members, which can often cause conflict in groups. And it's typical that there will be fighting for resources between groups. And when that fighting is strong enough, that can potentially result in the evolution of a social hierarchy where you'll have an alpha member or several alpha members who are kind of in charge. And that dictates how the rest of the group kind of falls into place. So even though you have a separate lecture posted for this chapter just on mating systems, let's just describe some of the mating systems that we see in this chapter that can result from some of these ecological behaviors. So monogamy is common in species that have males who participate in raising young. And that in itself isn't particularly common, but there are examples that we see. Monogamy means that one male and one female are socially bonded and that they only reproduce with each other. And this is not a common occurrence in mammals because male mammals can't provide the same level of care as females, right? Females are the only parents who can lactate and actually feed the young. Things like birds, though, male birds can help do all kinds of things in provisioning and protecting the young and the mother. Promiscuity is just the opposite of monogamy. Promiscuity results where males and females mate with multiple partners during a breeding season, and this can greatly increase the chance of finding the best mate for producing offspring. You'll learn more about this in the mating systems lecture. Polygamy is a mating system where males mate with more than one female. And this can occur when males are defending a territory that is attractive to multiple females. And males then end up competing for those females and resources. I wanted to point out here that most often females are the ones choosing mates because of something called anisogamy, which basically means that female gametes involve a much larger energy requirement than male gametes do. You can see how large an egg is compared to reproductive sperm cells in this picture. And females also often continue to have a larger parental investment after birth than males do. They offer more parental care in most examples. So, polyandry is a mating system that results when a female mates with more than one male. And often this happens in species where males take on more parental responsibility. This is a tree frog that you'll learn about in the other lecture about mating systems, where the male actually spends time protecting the egg mass that's laid in trees. This is a tree frog. Okay. Thanks, guys. I hope that gets you set up for Chapter 8, and I hope that you enjoy your next lecture on evolutionary mating systems.